Good evening and welcome to Growing for Good with Funding for Good. We are officially done with January and looking forward to a wonderful February. I got an email from someone that attended one of my webinars last week, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what their question was and answer their question at the same time. I kind of have an ongoing list now of questions people are asking me on a regular basis so I can use them for my vlog topics. This is the question: how to locate talented grant researchers and writers, and should they be separate people? Well, I'm going to tell you my Mandy Pierce Funding for Good response to that. And I'm not saying it is the be-all, end-all of responses or that there's a right or wrong answer to this, but this is what I tell other people, and this is how I practice writing and researching for other people. I think that almost anyone who is good in their field, who knows about grant writing, who knows about foundations, and knows about research, can do research for almost any organization. As long as they have the questions answered that they need in order to do the successful research. There's some parameters. I have a questionnaire that I send out to everyone who wants me to do grant research for them. And I ask questions like, what's your geographic region? What is your service area? Where does your program or project have an impact? Who do you serve? Who are your clients? What are your programs? What are your projects? What are the types of things you're looking to have funded and at what level? So you know you need a piece of equipment that costs $15,000. Or you need to purchase a new van, or you need to pay for a salary. So I get a list of all the things that you're looking for. And then there's a couple of other questions like, what's your fiscal year beginning and end? What is your annual operating budget? How many members are on your board and how many of them give financially every year? What percentage of them? So there's just a whole slew of questions. Organization fills that out, sends it back to me. I review it, I go over it with them, make sure I understand clearly what they're needing and what they're looking for. And then I go out and do the research to find the foundations that they're giving priorities or a match for the needs of my client at that time. That the amounts they give out are in line with what my client's looking for. For example, if I have a client who has a $1 million project, and I have an organization and everything lines up, the priorities are the same, the timeline is okay, they've funded similar projects in the past or whatever, but they only give out $2,500 to $5,000 a pop. Like, that's the most they're going to give out. More than likely, it's not going to be a good fit because my client needs $1 million. So if they give money, they don't know that their dollars are going to have an impact, because what if you don't raise the whole $1 million? There's a lot of conversations that go into that with program officers. And then there's a lot of research that goes into that on the back end as far as 990s. So I would go in and do research and see, what is the lowest amount they've given out? What's the largest amount they've given out? What is an average for them? How many grants are they giving out a year? Are they giving out, let's say their priority areas, say North Carolina. And I go on and look and I see, well, they funded North Carolina, but typically they only fund the Triangle area. It's a very specific part of the state. I might call the foundation and say, do you guys ever fund outside of the Triangle, or would it be considered, is it even worth our time? Because I don't want to give research to someone just because everything fits on paper if I, as the researcher, can do additional research and find out if it's a really good fit. What I tell people most of the time is I'm going to find between 8 and 12 really great prospects for you. And on paper, they're all going to look wonderful. When you go to talk with them, probably a third of them are not going to be interested in supporting your project. That's realistic. It could be more, it could be less. I might find 20 that fit. It really depends on what the needs are and what you're looking for. If you're looking for some really obscure piece of equipment to be purchased for a research project in another country, it's probably not going to be quite as easy to find donors that are willing to support that. But if you are doing work with the homeless population in a major urban city in the United States and you're having a huge impact in your region, it's probably going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to support that particular cause. So I think having realistic ideas about what you can do as a researcher and what you should expect out of that research is key. Being able to explain that to a potential client who's asking you to do research for them is also key. You don't want to set someone up for unrealistic expectations of what they're going to find. Sometimes people ask me to do research and I just point blank say, I can do some research for you, but I don't think it's going to produce the kinds of results that you're looking for, because what you're looking for is extremely difficult to find funding for. Sometimes I tell people, I think there are probably going to be state and federal funds that are available for this, but I don't think your organization is large enough to take those on and be successful at managing them. Also not sure if you would be successful in competing to receive them. So I really try to be upfront with people about what they can and should expect and what I can and can't do as a researcher. And then I provide all of that information with contact information, phone numbers, previous grants funded, copies of 990s, links to 990s, priority areas, geographic funding areas, examples of things they funded in the past. All of that stuff, if I can find, I provide in electronic format for the client. So that's why typically anybody that's good at it can do research, because you're dealing with a set of data and you're matching it to a set of data. So you don't have to be in the field that the person is working in that you're doing the research for. I don't have to be an animal welfare specialist because I have all the information at my fingertips to find those matches for them. I don't have to be working in a hospital. I don't have to be in a homeless shelter. I don't have to be in an archaeological nonprofit that's doing a dig. I don't have to be in an arts center or a ballet academy or a Latino center. I don't have to be in those places because you're giving me all the information that I need. So that's my first answer. My second answer is, for grant writers, what I tell people is we have an exercise that we do in my grant writing class that I teach, and I have everybody get an index card or a piece of paper or scratch paper out, and I say, I want you to write down 3 things that you could talk about for 15 minutes or more in front of a group of people. And we're going to share that in the room. So inevitably everybody goes around and writes down something personal, something work-related, whatever, but majority of people are going to write down things like my dog or my cat or my grandkids or my kids or my family or whatever it happens to be. And then I go around the room at the end of that and I say, okay, for all of you in the room that said you could talk about your grandkids or your kids or your dogs, how many of you think you could talk about your neighbors' grandkids, kids, or dogs and their specific experiences? And nobody raises their hand, because you can talk about similarities between kids. You can talk about similarities between grandkids and between dogs at different stages in their lives. But you can't talk about the experiences of that other person specifically, right? It's the same with grant writing. I can't go from writing grants in one place with one organization to automatically writing grants in another place for another organization if I don't have some of the background, the history, the successes, the programs, the projects, all of that information about the nonprofit. So yes, I can absolutely learn those things. I can absolutely do conversations with board members and staff members and reading the history, reviewing previous grants, talking about what the organization has evolved into and where it started and why it started, and I can learn all of those things. It's helpful if I have a history of working with another organization in the same field. So if I've worked with one homeless shelter and I go to another homeless shelter, there's going to be some similarities. I might understand the lingo, I might understand the need, and I might understand some of the issues that go around homelessness. But I'm not going to know their specific stories. I'm not going to know all the specifics of their history. It will be easier, but I still have to learn that stuff. So I tell people, have realistic expectations when you hire someone, that unless they're putting together generic applications for you that don't have the heart that's going to pull at the emotional piece of a reader, then anybody can put an application together. Anybody can follow instructions and just answer questions. But if you're wanting applications that are going to be competitive and applications that are going to be impactful to the reader, those are going to have to come from people who either worked in, volunteered with, served on a board for, or learned about the organization in a way that allows them to compellingly put together a grant application. Anybody can put together an application, but to put together a compelling, competitive application, I don't think anybody can just do that anywhere. In fact, I tell people all the time, you know, I can write for a lot of programs. State and federal grants are actually easier to write when you haven't worked in a program, because you're looking from the outside in, you're designing programs, it's easier to be more objective. But a lot of the more specific foundation, family, corporate grants require some knowledge of, experience of, and understanding of the organization, the field, the need. And in my personal opinion, it is much harder to do that if you haven't been involved in such an organization. So, there's a lot of questions that I would ask ahead of time before I hired a grant writer. I do not necessarily think a person that can do research for you could also write for you. I know it's possible, and I know plenty of people out there who do that with their business. They do both, research and writing. I do research and writing, but I turn down a lot of clients for writing because I don't want to charge them for the time it would take me to get up to speed as a writer to be successful for them. And most of them don't want to pay for that either. So, it's kind of a complicated question. It's a complicated answer, and I can't say that there's an answer that's right for everybody. I think if you can learn the skills internally and do it yourself, it's sort of like teaching people to fish, then you can maintain that within your organization and you don't have to contract people out all the time. I think that it is most beneficial, from what I've seen in the work I've done, for organizations that know they're growing to the capacity of having state and federal grants or wanting to apply for them, potentially to hire and contract out people to do that, because it is exceptionally time consuming. And if you don't want to burden your staff with that, that's a great thing to use outside contract work for. But I fully believe in organizations learning from the inside out. If you know how to do it and you choose to contract someone out anyway, that's fine. At least you have the skill set in-house. A lot of times people who don't have the skill set don't know the questions to ask of the grant writer to make sure the grant writer's doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's like I always tell people, your executive directors should be coming to get trained as a grant writer, because if you're writing under them and they don't know anything about grant writing, how can they manage you? How do they know the questions to ask or what you should actually be working on? And so it always amazes me when I meet people and their superiors don't know anything about grant writing, because it's very hard to manage someone that doesn't know anything about what you're doing. Another thing to consider is, how much time does your organization want to be spending on grant management, and are the grants that you're writing requiring reports and follow-up that your staff can manage if you're contracting out someone else to do the work of the initial writing piece. So there's just a lot of things to think about and a lot of questions to ask. I'll tell you one that came up for me a couple of times last year. People would say, what's your success rate in grant writing? And I would say, well, what do you mean by that? And they didn't really know. They just wanted to know what my success rate was. So I would say it's in the 90% success rate for all the grants that we have written as an organization. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's really great. I'm like, yeah, but how do you know what that entails? Technically, I could say I've written 3 grants and we got 2 of them. So that's a really good success rate. I've talked to people before who's like, oh, I have a really good success rate. I've gotten every grant I've ever applied for. And my first question is, how many grants have you applied for? And you get numbers like, oh, well, I've written 3. Well, that's awesome. I've written hundreds. So, asking a question but knowing the follow-up question after it when you're speaking to a grant writer is very important. You have to know what you're asking someone to do if you're hiring a grant writer. Are you asking them to just put an application together? Are you asking them to do research and put applications together? Are you asking them to manage a grant once it's been written? So if you receive it, are you asking them to help you with the reporting that happens on the back end, or the reporting and tracking that happens during the grant, depending on what type of grant you're getting? What are all the pieces that you're asking someone to help you with? And if you don't know anything about grant writing, it's going to be really hard for you to figure out what you need to ask them to help you with. And then what they're charging you. I think getting some comparisons from people in your area will help you determine what a good fee is and what's reasonable. Make sure somebody's not overpricing their work with you. And the experience level of the person is important as well. I work with a lot of people who go to a 2-day class and decide they want to become grant writers. And, I don't know how they present themselves to organizations that they want to hire them. But, asking someone, how many years of experience have you had and what did that entail? Someone could say, I have 5 years of experience, and they wrote 1 grant every year for the same organization. So 5 years of experience really isn't a lot of time. Someone else could say, I've got a year of experience, but I put together 40 grant applications last year and we received over half of them. So, asking questions that are quantitative and being able to assign numbers and figure out what kind of experience someone really has is helpful. Let me make sure I covered all that. How to locate talented grant researchers. So how to locate them. I would say go to reputable organizations in your area that do nonprofit work. So here in North Carolina, it could be the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits or a large foundation or an organization that provides a lot of nonprofit training, like maybe your local college. We have small business centers here in North Carolina, and ask for advice or recommendations. Go to larger nonprofits in your area and say, who have you worked with? Who does research for you? And ask for recommendations if you don't already know people. I'm in the field, so I know a lot of people who do grant writing and research and fundraising in general, so I would be able to refer people in the field. So that's how I would find a grant researcher. And then the writer would kind of be the same way. It really depends on who you're looking for and what kind of grant you're looking for and what you're hoping for them to do for you. But I would go through the same avenues of talking with people in the field. And then should they be separate people is really up to the organization and the skill set of the person that you've hired for either the research or the writing as to whether it should and could be the same person. I hope that this was helpful. Again, just my insights and opinions. I've got about 20 years of experience in the field and I've been grant writing for that long. So those are just my experiences and my opinions, and by all means, they are not the be all end all of correct or right or 100% the way it should be. That's just my opinion, and I hope it's helpful for some of you and maybe at least gave you some things to think about and some questions to ask before you move into hiring someone to do research or writing for you. And if I can be of help, please feel free to put questions or post your comments in the comment section below and let us know what you think about it. And I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week on Growing for Good with Funding for Good.